Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
There are no corrections this morning.
Thank you. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are none this morning, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized for a point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. Today is National Vietnam War Veterans Day, and as a legislature, we wanted to thank our Chief Sergeant at Arms, Burdett Burkhart, for his incredible service to our country. Burdett enlisted in the United States Navy and began his military service in 1969. He served the Navy Seabees Brigade near the ancient city of Hue, Vietnam, at Port Hueneme. He was also stationed in San Diego, Midway Island, California, and other parts of Vietnam. Following his service in the Navy, Burdett served for 30 years in the Nebraska Air National Guard and retired as Senior Master Sergeant. He also received the Meritorious Service Medal following his retirement. Burdett then served his community by working in the Lincoln Police Department for 25 years. Burdett helped those outside of the United States when he worked for the United Nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina. He also worked for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and monitored free and fair elections in 8 different countries. Burdett serves as Sergeant at Arms with the Nebraska Legislature from 2015 to 2021 and became Chief Sergeant at Arms in 2022. Burdett and his wife Consuela have been married for 39 years and have one son, Eric. We thank Burdett for his incredible service to his community, state, and country. Thank you, and I hope you all join me in applause.
Senator Vargas would like to introduce our doctor for the day, Dr. Teresa Hatcher of Omaha, sitting under the balcony. Also like to introduce a guest from Senator Halloran's district. It's Karen Barnes, the wife of Pastor Tom Barnes, who is our chaplain for the day. Welcome. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LR 64, 65, 66, 67, 68, and 69. Mr. Clerk will now proceed to the first item on the agenda.
Mr. President, first item on the agenda, Legislative Bill 376. There are E&R amendments pending in addition to an amendment to the E&R amendments. Mr. President, to that end, Senator Hunt would move to bracket Legislative Bill 376 until June 2nd, 2023.
Senator Lowe, we'll give you 1 minute to refresh us on LB 376.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. LB 376 was brought on behalf of the Liquor Control Commission. It is, the original Bill 376 is to set fees by the commission that are not to exceed $30 for the establishment of to more accurately track and identify alcoholic products being imported into Nebraska for taxation purposes. In it is also LB 259, which is a farm winery, so that they are able to sell a beer and other liquor that is not produced on the farm. LB 377, which adds up to 12 special designated liquor licenses per year for nonprofit entities. LB 596 clarifies the Liquor Control Act.
It's time, Senator Lowe.
Thank you.
Senator Hunt, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Speaker, Speaker Arch. I remember being a little bit bummed is probably too strong of a word, but kind of like, when I met with Speaker Arch before the session started. I made an attempt, didn't work with all of you with scheduling, but I tried to meet with all of you before the session started and talk about what our shared goals were for this session. I I made it clear to a lot of you, and Speaker Arch and I talked about this explicitly too, that my priority this session was to block an abortion ban. And I knew that with this body, that would be really difficult, near impossible, even though similar to the ban on trans health care, there were many of you, more than 33 of you, or how would that work? More than 17 of you that do oppose these bans on health care. I might ask you ladies to go have a conversation away from me. Thank you. So we're in a position, here in the legislature where even though we certainly have the votes, if you were voting your conscience, if you were voting in terms of what you actually know about these bans on healthcare, whether it's reproductive healthcare, whether it's a ban on trans healthcare, and of course, those things are completely related. Those are part and parcel of the same radical agenda to take away bodily autonomy for people in this state, when what they're really saying matters to them are things like the economy, things like access to services, things like funding for schools and special education and things like that. And those are all things that we would certainly be working on if one of you had been not voting last Thursday. So again, these are terms that were made explicitly clear for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so if you want to ask yourself, why are we here? It's not on me. It's not on anyone in this body except those who voted to advance a ban on health care last week. For this bill, LB 376, I introduced an amendment to the ENR amendment that would remove the $30 limitation on fees, because we know that the Liquor Control Commission wanted this bill, and it was brought on their behalf to enable more accountability and make it easier for them to accurately handle alcoholic imports to the state from other states. And my feeling was perhaps that we shouldn't arbitrarily limit whatever the appropriate fee is for them to do that work. On the other hand, having served in general affairs for 2 years in the committee that this came out of, I know that lots of work probably went into this bill, lots of testimony. Then on the other hand, if I had 3 hands, I would say, judging from how this session is going and how my experiences have been in other committees, probably very little work went into this bill. But again, not being on the committee, I don't really know. But that's what my amendment does. And then what this motion does is bracket the bill, and we'll take a vote on that in a couple hours, most likely. Yesterday, we passed a rules change in this body without any public hearing, without any accountability from the second house, to make it so that only one of each kind of a couple of motions can be introduced on each bill. Over the weekend, anticipating that all of you would, like lemmings, follow the leader, who for you is Senator Erdman, walk off the cliff and accept this rules change in hopes of silencing some minority members of the body. Some of my colleagues and I prepared 742 motions so that we would take each motion on each bill that's still pending before the legislature. And by doing that, again, this is part of the negotiation tactics that we are engaged in. People like Senator Michaela Cavanaugh are in conversation and in relationship with the speaker, are in conversation with several members of the body who still have questions about the implications of the trans healthcare ban, who are earnestly and seriously looking for an off-ramp, looking for a way to end this filibuster, to move on with the rest of the session and the priorities Nebraskans have, and who also frankly need cover, who need to be protected from the radical voices, not just in this state, but in this country, that target people like me. I can take the heat, I take it every day. But of course, there are far-right radical members of this body, Senator Von Gilleren, Senator Sanders, Senator Lowe, Senator Lippincott, Senator DeKay, Senator Jacobson, Senator Brandt, Senator Dorn, Senator Ballard, Senator Linehan, unfortunately, because I thought she would be much more moderate this year. But Senator Armendariz, I think that her conscience is not really in this, but these are people who are afraid of taking the kind of fire that trans youth take in our country and in our state every day. These are not people who have the same courage to live day to day and vote their conscience, vote for what they think is best for the people of this state, in the same way that trans people and LGBTQ people have courage to just live and go to school and be themselves and get dressed every day and take the kind of abuse and heat that I experience, that my son experiences, and that lots of people in our schools in Nebraska face. So there are people who are still in relationship working on a negotiation to find an off-ramp for this kind of filibuster. Senator Danielle Conrad is ever willing to be in conversation with anybody. But I am not, frankly. I don't have it in me right now. Maybe that'll change, but probably not. Because to me, this is a job. To me, this isn't a higher calling. It isn't sacred. It isn't, I'm not endowed to have this seat or something like that. And the overwhelming chorus that I hear from my district and the people I represent is that they don't want us focused on this kind of thing. And they think that the tactics that I'm engaging in, and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh is engaging in, Senator Danielle Conrad is engaging in, that this is the only way out of this, actually. And frankly, one of you just needs to be not voting. And I know that there is more than one of you who would like to be not voting. So this isn't even asking anyone to change their vote in terms of like what they really feel. It's certainly, as Speaker Arch has characterized it, not silencing anybody. Nobody wants to silence a senator. But as you are trying to make consequences for the filibuster and us taking time by doing things like changing the rules without having a hearing, in a way that many rules experts in this body, including Senator Wayne, did not think was appropriate, did not think was in order, the way that we did that. But because the majority of this body went along with Senator Erdman, it didn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter. We learned this session with the motion to overrule the chair that Senator Slama made, with the rules change motion that Senator Erdman made, that whatever we do in the beginning of session to adopt a set of rules, it really doesn't end up mattering, because if you can whip up more than 25 people to overrule a chair, or if you can whip up enough people to do a rules change, turns out the rules are whatever you want them to be, right? And this is coming from people who think that they're from the party of rule of law, the party of law and order, the party of following the law. But what you're really following is one leader who has an authoritarian Christian nationalist view about what should be happening in Nebraska.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And that goes for Speaker Arch, that goes for Senator Linehan, Senator Jacobson, who I believe has aspirations to be a speaker someday. And what you're doing is giving in to pressure from, if it's partisan pressure, I don't know, if it's from donors or something, I don't know, or if it's just the fear of being reelected. I've even heard from many of you who wanted to come in and be moderates and wanted to come in and be statespeople that, oh, well, if this bill had only come up when I'm term limited, or just wait till I'm term limited, then I'll be really different. You know how cowardly that sounds? That you have to wait until the voters can't vote you out in order for you to actually vote the way you feel. People have said to me, Senator Hunt, you're never getting elected to anything again. Your career in politics is done because of this. I don't care. You think that matters to me?
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And you are next in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. That doesn't matter to me, because the job that I have is not the most interesting thing about me, and my job is also not the most important thing about me. And for some of you, like, maybe this is your peak. Like, maybe this is going to be like your whole identity and the whole thing about you for, making people call you senator out and about in the town and stuff like that. But I don't frankly need this job. And I behaved the very same way when I wasn't term limited, because what drives my votes and what drives my behavior on this floor is a principle of bodily autonomy, freedom and liberty, and letting people make their own decisions about their bodies. And I also see this movement for what it is, which is something that has been churned up to appease a very, very small population of vocal, radical, hateful people on the far right, who are frankly not most of you. You guys don't feel that way in your hearts, really. You just want lower taxes. You see yourselves as normal Republicans who just want less regulation, lower taxes, and personal responsibility or whatever. That's how you see yourself. But by catering to this far, far right interest so you can pick up one more vote and reassure that you do get reelected and you can be term limited and then you can finally vote your conscience. Do you know how cowardly that sounds? And some of you are true believers for sure, and I get that, and I actually respect that a lot more. A lot of people know that I actually got along pretty well with Senator Mike Groney when he was here. And part of the reason for that was he was very clear about what he actually believed about things. He probably would have come up to me and called me a groomer to my face, while all of you just call me that behind my back. And I'd much prefer that, because I always knew where Senator Groney stood on stuff and what he really thought. And that made him unpopular. In not the same way, but similar ways that I can be unpopular as well. But, with me, you're never going to wonder what I think. You're never going to wonder where I'm sitting on something. And you're never going to have to wait for me to be term limited or anything to vote my conscience and vote the right way. I would like to get this session back on track and talk about things like economic development, talk about things like Senator Mike McDonald's lake that he'd like to build, talk about things like child tax credits, the EITC. I think Senator Danielle Conrad has a good bill around that. Talk about pet insurance with Senator Ballard, which I've put some good amendments on recently. But one of you has to be not voting on that trans healthcare bill. So here's a couple ways it could work. And Speaker Arch has said he doesn't want to do this, but Speaker Scheer, who was the speaker when I started here, he had a lot of rules that I didn't agree with. He had this 3-hour rule where if a bill went 3 hours on a filibuster, and then the bill introducer would have to come and show him a vote card with 33 votes on it that showed they could overcome a filibuster. Unless they had the card with 33 votes, he wouldn't reschedule the bill. So we had a lot of bills that went 3 hours and then died because on general file, we weren't quite there to getting 33 votes on something. And that's really frustrating, because what that actually did was it incentivized people.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. What that actually did was it incentivized people to vote bills that they didn't support through to select file to the next round of debate, because introducers were under so much pressure to say, hey, please sign this card, please give me your vote just for general file, just for the first round of debate, and then we'll fix it on select. Like, how many of you remember that phrase that we heard all the time? We'll fix it on select. And we don't have that anymore, because now we have 8 fair hours to get people on board with a bill before it advances to the next round of debate. But one thing Speaker Arch could do is say to Senator Kauth, you have to show me a card with 33. And that would give some of you cover. It would give a block of you cover, honestly, to come off of this vote, to be not voting. And that card would not be public unless Senator Kauth chose to make it public.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Frederickson would like to recognize members, approximately 50, from the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations across Nebraska. They are seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be welcomed by your legislature. Senator Vargas would like to recognize also a group from the Nebraska chapter, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, approximately 30 members seated in the north balcony. Please rise and be recognized by your legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. I rise and, well, I don't know yet if I'm in support of the bracket motion or not. I'm actually going to think about that. I might vote against it because I kind of like the bill, but yeah, we'll see when we get there. Thank you to Senator Hunt for her comments this morning. I remember it was either my first or second year, and I don't remember what was going on, but one of my colleagues came up to me and said, off to the side, "Don't you want to get reelected?" And I was like, I mean, I just got here, but maybe if I run, I want to get reelected. And I thought, they're like, well, you should think about that. And I was like, well, gosh, no. If I start thinking about my election when I'm making policy decisions, then I am failing at my job. And people do, I get the same things as Senator Hunt about you're never going to be elected to office, you're never going to be reelected. Even if I weren't term limited, I wouldn't change how I am approaching things because this is how I think the situation needs to be handled and approached. So now I don't want to get reelected. I'm term limited, and that's fine. Term limits that were enacted to get rid of the longest serving member of the legislature, who also happened to be an outspoken Black man from North Omaha. And now, just like everything else that the legislature does to squash the minority voice, the legislature is paying the price for enacting term limits. Great lesson. So LB 376 is the liquor bill. I am going to go back to where I left off in the deposition of Matt Wallen in the lawsuit against the state for the contract with St. Francis Ministries back in 2019. And the questions are coming from the attorney. So your recollection is that the protest caused one of the three original winning bidders to ultimately not be a winning bidder, correct? Mr. Cox, I object to the form of the question as to the cause. Witness, I don't know why one of those three. I don't know if it was the protest or what ultimately led to the three not being awarded that were originally noticed by Mr. Kinney. Question. So my question is whether the CEO was involved in the ultimate decision as to who the three managed care vendors would be for the state of Nebraska. Mr. Post, I object to foundation. Mr. Cox, and to form as to what, quote, involved, end quote, means here at this point. Mr. Kinney, question, do you understand the question? Answer, can you restate the question? It's restated back. Witness, my recollection is that there was a procurement that was run and that it went through the state's procurement process, and the CEO would not have the ability or capacity to pick a winner or loser. It would have been the procurement process. Whoever scored the highest points in the procurement would have been identified as the winner of the procurement. Mr. Kinney, question. So is your testimony then that the CEO had no input into who the winning bidder was in the managed care procurement? Mr. Post, I object to form and foundation. Mr. Kinney, if you know, answer. The CEO did not score those bids. Question, I understand. My question is whether the CEO had any input in the final selection. Mr. Cox, same objection. Witness, no, she wouldn't have input into that. Question. So we've talked about my original question is your involvement in procurement. So you have mentioned in the 2017 case management services that was procured during your time as chief of staff, correct? Answer, yes. Question. And then I believe you said you had some awareness or involvement in the employee first services procurement. Is that correct? Answer, the employment first services contract. That's correct. Question, were you aware of the Heritage Health procurement but not involved in any way? Is that correct? Answer, that's correct. Question, any other procurement during this time as chief of staff? Answer, not that I can recall. I think that's probably about my time. So I'm going to just mark that off to get back to, and eventually this is going to lead to a conversation
Time,
about our
Senator.
procurement process.
Senator Erdman would like to recognize a group from Keith County leadership, and they are seated in the south balcony. If you could please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity.
It's my second opportunity after my open.
They tell me it's your third opportunity, and then you have your close.
Okay. Well, I started my opening on my motion talking about something that I got completely sidetracked from, which is when I sat down with Speaker Arch before the session started. I tried to meet with many of you, and it just wasn't possible to get our schedules to work together. One thing he made clear, and has also said on the floor several times, is that he didn't want to do a lot of late nights, that he wanted to be efficient, move the session along, hopefully not have the social justice issues take up a lot of oxygen. We were all afraid of the abortion bill doing that, but what we didn't expect was this trans healthcare ban to take up that much oxygen. Frankly, I didn't expect it because we have never had a trans healthcare ban introduced in Nebraska. And in my conversations with reporters from outlets from different states and different national outlets, that's the part that they didn't realize and understand, and that's what kind of put this filibuster into a little bit more context for them, which is in Nebraska, something like this is not normal. You know, we might be a red state, we might be a conservative state, so they think we're like Texas and Florida and Missouri, but we're not. The people of Nebraska are not. And traditionally, our legislature has not been that way. Traditionally, if someone introduced a backbencher bill like Senator Kauth did, saying, you know, we're going to ban healthcare for children who are part of the most persecuted, marginalized, discriminated against group in our state, and who's also like a huge minority. I mean, it's not like they have a lobby out there to fight for them. That typically in this legislature, that is not a bill that would be taken seriously. That's a bill that would have gotten a hearing on the last day. It wouldn't have gotten a priority. It would have had a hearing going till midnight, which LB 574, that bill would have gone much later if Senator Ben Hansen didn't cut off the ability of the second house to testify in that hearing. So a lot of factors have converged to get us to where we are today, giving Senator Kathleen Kauth's bill the light of day that it doesn't deserve. And again, don't characterize what I'm saying as I'm silencing a senator or something. No one is saying she shouldn't introduce the bill, or she isn't allowed to introduce the bill, or it shouldn't be scheduled for a hearing, or it shouldn't be scheduled for debate if it comes out of committee. What I'm saying is that knowing that Speaker Arch's goal this session was to be efficient, to move things along quickly, to get our hands in the punch bowl of ARPA funds, and to not have late nights, why did this body prioritize a ban on trans healthcare then? If all of you are standing up and saying, we want to get to school funding, we want to get to economics, we want to get to different issues that are facing the state, me too. But there's a boundary. And it's not because I want my way, it's not because I'm whining, it's because we're talking about a human rights issue, and that's not the same thing as the budget. It's not the same thing as, you know, marginal tax rate. Reasonable people can disagree about that kind of thing. Frankly, seriously, reasonable people cannot disagree about the humanity of trans kids.
1
And that's
minute.
what's at stake here. Thank you, Mr. President. So I was a little bit secretly disappointed when Senator Arch said that we weren't going to have a lot of late nights, because that's when I really do well. It's well known that I'm not a morning person. It's well known that I struggle to get here before 10 a lot of the time. And as a single parent, I think part of that is because I work a lot at night. In my normal life, quote unquote, when I'm not here in the legislature, which is more than half the year, I work my job during the day. I get my kid from school. We do homework and activities, make dinner, which I hate making dinner, clean the house if that can be done. And then at night is the time that I really get to myself, either to work on my own projects or to do the house cleaning or watch a TV show or whatever. And I'm seeing nodding from a lot of parents up in the balcony because they
Time,
probably
Senator.
do the same thing. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
I yield my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. I'm seeing a lot of nodding from other people in the balcony who know, even if you're partnered, even if you have a spouse or a husband or something, and someone at home who can help you with these things, nighttime for parents of young kids is really when you finally have time to focus on the stuff that you choose. During the day, it's doing the things I have to do to pay the rent and the bills, doing the things I have to do to keep my child happy against some stiff odds, honestly. And then after bedtime is when I get to be creative. My mind can work. I can work on writing things. I can catch up on email. I can have a glass of wine and watch a show. That's the time that is for me. So I would not go to bed at 10 p.m. I would not go to bed at 9 p.m. or anything like that, because then I don't have any time to myself at all. If I get any time to relax, I have to take it at the end of the day. So, one thing that speakers have done to punish me in the past, knowing I'm not a night owl, is scheduling my bills first. And I think I have to give credit. That's a very clever strategy. If you want to throw me off something, is to get me going early in the morning, because I really don't shine at that time. But last night, before we adjourned at 9, I feel like I was really starting to get going. And Senator Jacobson had made some comments about how rural Nebraska has real Christian values or something like that. And I was so ready to kind of clap back on that. And then we adjourned, and I kind of drove home. I drove the hour home, as every single day I drive an hour here and I drive an hour home. I came home to my child asleep. The pizza I had DoorDashed to him for dinner was on the counter. The dishes were in the dishwasher. The laundry was changed, rotated, advanced. And I was so proud. And I went and I kissed my kid, and he was like, "Yeah, good night. Yeah." And "No, thank you, Mom. I love you. I miss you. Hope you had a great day, but this is age appropriate. It's fine." And then I was just electrified for the whole rest of the night, thinking about the work we did yesterday and kind of dreading having to be here at 9 again and, go from 0 to 60 and sustain that again till at least 9 p.m., which is what we're going to have to do for the entire rest of the session. So that's all to say. Last night when we went late, I was very happy to do that. I felt in my element. I felt like my mind was sharp in a way that, honestly, in our regular course of business from 9 to 3 or 9 to 5, I don't always feel that way. And I don't know if that's a function of being a parent or if that's something innate to myself, because both of my parents are night owls too. When I was a kid, they would stay up until 3 or 4 a.m., and they still do. My brother, there's 4 of us. My 2 parents are big night owls. They'll stay up all night, always have. I'm the same way. And my brother, who's in the Navy, and he's working in the White House right now, which is really exciting. He's a complete early bird. He's always been getting up early. He was always first up in the house. And I always thought it was interesting, like I didn't come from a military family. That wasn't a tradition in my family or anything.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. We didn't even necessarily come from like a super religious family. I mean, we were Catholic. I went to Catholic church and I got confirmed and I went to CCD and stuff, but it wasn't, you know, a huge, I didn't feel any oppression through that, I should say. But I thought it was interesting that both my brother and I were very different. He's pretty conservative, actually. We chose such different careers and we're such different people, but we're both working in public service. And I think my parents should be very proud for raising two kids that are so different, but still have so much respect for the institutions of democracy, for procedure and process that makes this world work. And also an understanding that cutting down people's personal rights is not the way to get there. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Lowe, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And now back to the bill. The bill that we are discussing today is LB 376, which was brought on behalf of the Liquor Control Commission. The original LB 376 was to enable the commission to more accurately and correctly identify alcoholic products being imported into or produced in the state of Nebraska for taxation and distribution purposes. AM 296 to 376 establishes a fee that the commission is not to exceed $30 and includes new language to establish licensed wholesalers in Nebraska, and they may import alcoholic liquor from an affiliated wholesaler out of the state if the report required in this section has been previously submitted for the product being imported. The report designates the Nebraska licensed wholesaler for the product, and the product was obtained by the affiliated wholesaler from the same primary source of supply identified in the report. AM 296 also remits fees collected pursuant to this section to the state treasurer for credit to the Nebraska Liquor Control Commission Rule and Regulation Cash Fund. In this bill now is also included LB 259, and it adds language to section 53-123.11 of the Liquor Control Act to allow the holder of a farm winery license to obtain a retail license to sell beer or other liquor that is not produced by the farm winery for consumption on their premise. It also includes LB 377, which will allow nonprofit entities to apply up to 12 special designated liquor licenses. This part was brought by the Nebraska Craft Brewers Guild. LB 596 clarifies the Nebraska Liquor Control Act so as to expressly allow liquor manufacturers and wholesalers to enter into a sponsorship and advertisement agreements with certain organizations, including nonprofit organizations. AM 472 was one we added on the floor. It was a Senator Merman's bill, and it allows the holder of a micro distillery license, they may directly sell for resale up to 500 gallons per calendar year of micro distilled products and self-distribute. They must use their own employees to do this. So that is the bill we are discussing today, up until I think about 1:45, sometime in there. And not to be distracted by the other comments going on this morning, we're on a liquor bill this morning. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, for announcements.
Thank you, Mr. President. Notice that the Transportation Committee will hold an executive session at 10 o'clock a.m. under the south balcony. Transportation exec session, 10 o'clock under the south balcony. Additionally, the Education Committee will be holding an executive session at 10 o'clock under the north balcony. Education, 10 o'clock under the north balcony. New LR 76 from Senator Clements. That'll be laid over. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Conrad, you are recognized to speak.
Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I had a chance to visit just really briefly last night with Senator Lowe after looking at the committee statement to see if the concerns of those who testified neutral or opposed had been addressed or needed to be addressed in order to move the measure forward. I appreciated his approach in catching me up to speed on the committee deliberations, and it was very instructive as we approached our work together on LB 376. So I appreciate Senator Lowe's time in that regard, and I'm happy to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Hunt if she so desires.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 15 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Conrad. Colleagues, I agree with Senator Lowe. Certainly don't be distracted by anything I'm saying here on the floor. And I also wouldn't think any of you would be distracted by anything I'm saying on the floor. I think you're all working on your email or playing Candy Crush or, fantasizing about what you would do if you did not have to be here today. But the truth is you don't have to be here today. You can go back to your office. You can go home, frankly. Because there are lobbyists out in the rotunda and there are bill introducers here who will text you once we get close to cloture and your presence is needed again on the floor. But that time is not now because we aren't taking a vote right now. I think that over the past 5 years that I've been here, there have been, this is a very rough estimate, but maybe if there's 800 bills a year, say 700 bills a year, so 3,500 bills, there's probably only been 10 that came to the floor, maybe 15, that I wasn't involved in somehow. And that's not really my preference. I mean, early in my time in the legislature, I was not shy to talk on the record. I was not shy to share information. And then that pigeonholed me as a person who's willing to talk on the mic. And so then as other people are under the balcony negotiating and figuring out how they're going to move bills forward, but they need 30 more minutes or they need 1 more hour, I early on was one of the people who they would come to and say, Megan, can you just take time? Do you think you can take I'll give you time, but can you please take time? And so even on bills that I wasn't really invested in or that I didn't really have a dog in the fight, I didn't care about what the outcome would be, I would then have to get invested somehow, talk about the bill, talk about an amendment, talk about something so that the adults in the room or whatever could go under the balcony and find a compromise and agreement to move the bill forward. And I think that there's only been 10 times maybe in the last 5 years where a bill came to the floor and I got to do what you're doing, which is just wait. Wait and listen and wait for the vote and play Candy Crush. And I'm 30% envious of that, but I'm 70% kind of isn't that a waste of the gift? Isn't that a waste and a squandering of the privilege we have to be here with this platform that we're going to have for a very short, limited,
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, a very short, limited time in our lives. Most of you have had illustrious careers. You've been successful in whatever way you define that. And this may be a capstone in retirement or a way to give back in public service to your community that has supported you throughout your career and your life and the lives of your children. that's what motivated me to run and come here, is my gratitude for my neighborhoods in Dundee and Benson and Keystone in Midtown Omaha that have supported me as a business owner and a single parent since I was 19, running a clothing shop and a co-working space in my district. And, you know, I won't be here for long enough to do very much.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hunt, I had the very same experience. There were times where the speaker would come to me at night when there were negotiations happening on the floor and say, can you just take time because we're working on a deal? And I'd be like, all right, let me read this deposition to you. And it would oftentimes be on bills that I was like, I have no idea what this bill is. I'm just gonna help out and be a team player for the full legislature. I do remember one late night where there was some negotiated amendment. I think it was Senator Pansing Brooks and Senator Geis, and then Senator John Kavanaugh and staff figured out the language fix that got everybody happy, but Senator John Kavanaugh has really terrible handwriting. Sorry, Senator Kavanaugh. And so they needed somebody to handwrite a really long floor amendment. So I just remember sitting over there with a bunch of lawyers, making sure I put the commas in the right place, slowly writing out this floor amendment. And that's kind of the fun, like how the sausage is made stuff. Now that we're in it, yeah, now that we're in it, that's the fun stuff. Last night we had Senator Dungan and Senator Brewer off the mic with Senator Brewer's legal counsel, chatting through some of the logistics and thoughts and things on LB 77. And that's what we're here for, is the making things better, finding those tweaks, finding those fixes, finding a way to make that happen on the floor, on the fly, and everybody can have a role to play in that. Even if you're not really engaged in whatever's going on, you can have a role to play by helping take time on the mic so that those things can happen. And that was oftentimes the role that I played over the last several years, because I think it was known that I was able to take time on the mic on the fly, and I didn't have to have a prepared speech. And so thanks for reminding me of that, because that kind of reminds me of like a fun time in this place, doing the work and kind of being in the mix. And maybe we'll see more of that as these all day late nights go on. We'll see people kind of taking down those walls that they've put up over the last 50 some days and start to get work done. So I could go back to talking about the bill, Senator Lowe. You know how much I love to talk about a good fish fry, and we are still in Lent. I think we've got this Friday is maybe the last one, because yeah, Easter is April 8th, I believe. So again, LB 376 just helps with that fish fry community in Omaha, having those those temporary liquor license. Girl Scout season is cookie season is over, so that's unfortunate. Although my house is still lousy with Girl Scout cookies. I can't believe they haven't all been gone through, because I haven't been home as much, and I just assume that my kids are like sneaking the Girl Scout cookies, but maybe they're just hiding it better, like moving in having just one row that I can see in the front, like they haven't eaten all the cookies or something. They probably are that sneaky, to be honest. And I haven't been eating the Girl Scout cookies, even though I love them. But I think I've mentioned before that I have a lazy gallbladder, so it doesn't like it when I eat anything that's yummy. So I'm off the Girl Scout cookies for now. But yes, the fish fry season is still here. Y'all got one more chance to go check them out.
1 minute.
I got some great ones in my district. I think St. Vincent de Paul, which is a newly acquired part of my district from redistricting, has they have like mac and cheese, and they own their own fryer, and it's like a real big to-do. That's on the western edge of my district. One of my favorites, it's not in my district, it's John Frederickson's, is Marry Our Queen. And during the pandemic, they always had a setup to do like drive-through pickup. So at the height of the pandemic, they were already set up for fish fries to maintain that so people could still drive through and do their pickup. And I know my brother did that. My brother is an avid connoisseur of the fish fries. So if you really want to know the best fish fries in town, you should ask the other Senator Kavanaugh. I don't eat fish, so I like to go to the ones that have mac and cheese or the spaghetti feeds instead of fish fries. So there you go, Senator Lowe. I talked about the bill.
Time, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I think there's a lot I should respond to there. First off, we're not all blessed with all of the gifts in the world, and one of the ones I wasn't blessed with was good handwriting. So I apologize, but that's just the nature of the beast. Nature of the beast. I don't have good handwriting. That's when Senator Michaela Kavanaugh was maligning my handwriting, which is, it's true. I have bad handwriting. And two, there are a lot of great fish fries. I would give a shout out to Holy Name, our very own Paul Hamill, who I think is here today. The last time I was at Holy Name, he was serving up the fish. But anyway, that's all I really needed to say. I would yield my time to Senator Hunt if she would like it.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 10 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. I don't have any recollection of what John Kavanaugh's handwriting looks like, but I think people are generally too hard on themselves about their handwriting. How many of you have a friend where they have beautiful handwriting and they write down a list and they give it to you, or they write you a card or something, and then they're like, oh, sorry if you can't read my chicken scratch, and it's like, this is gorgeous. And people are like very self-deprecating about this kind of thing. So I don't think we should be too hard on ourselves about that. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh said, my conversation about sometimes being asked to take time reminded her of some fond memories early in the legislature. I remember that amendment that was being handwritten on a floor pad, on a motion pad, a couple years ago with Senator Geist and Senator Pansing Brooks and John Kavanaugh helping with that. And that was one of those moments you kind of live for in here, those moments where you're hanging on off a ledge and we're so close and we're running out of time. And if one person looks at another person wrong, the deal's going to fall through. But then something good ends up getting done for people. And that's what I'm craving so much in this legislature. What I can do is take time. What I can do is talk about different things, but I'd like to see others in conversation, in relationship, still working to try and find an off-ramp so that we can take one vote off of Senator Kathleen Kauth's unserious, bigoted, discriminatory bill that is very harmful for kids in our state, but also the wider LGBTQ plus community, and also a lot of straight people who care about gay people in our community. Probably what I've heard from most of all are honestly from people who are older, people who have kids and grandkids who are not even necessarily trans, but maybe gay or maybe non-binary or maybe just a little queer, a little bit weird. And several people in this building, actually, several staffers and administrative support and lots of people in this building who I was very surprised reached out to me because they come off kind of square. And it turns out this bill matters to a lot of people. A lot of squares actually think that this is a very discriminatory, bigoted bill, and that it's beneath the work that we're called to do here in the legislature. I feel called to do the work that gives me the feeling that we get when Senator Pansing Brooks and Senator Geist and Senator John Kavanaugh were handwriting a motion on a pad to save a bill.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Those are the moments that make this really fulfilling. And we can have a lot more of those moments this session. We're on day 52 now. We have squandered a lot of time during the several weeks where we just had check-in days to check in and then move on to committee hearings. We could have been debating bills at that time. We could be debating all kinds of things and having a session going according to normal course if one of you had voted your conscience and not advanced that unserious, bigoted, discriminatory bill introduced by Senator Kathleen Kauth. Because traditionally, this is not the work that we really do here. And that's what I was
Time,
speaking.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Conrad, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Kavanaugh if she so desires.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, 4 minutes, 35 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Conrad. I would like to apologize to Senator Kavanaugh. I did not mean to malign his handwriting. It was germane to the story as to why I was participating in writing the amendment, and there were others who had not quite legible handwriting. I will say they were all attorneys. I don't know if attorneys have bad handwriting. Oh yes, I'm being verified that attorneys have bad handwriting. I would like to highlight somebody who has really beautiful handwriting. Senator Merv Reapy has some of the most spectacular handwriting I have ever seen. It is quite lovely and also very legible. So just a shout out to Senator Reapy. If any of us need some handwritten long form floor amendments this session, I think he's the one we need to go to, because not only is it legible, it's also beautiful. So one of the things you pick up when you sit next to somebody is whether or not they have good handwriting. I have terrible handwriting, but not as terrible as Senator Kavanaugh. So that kind of speaks volumes. I remember last year when we were debating LB 920, there was a lot of time where we had lots of people taking up time because the people working on 920 were sitting in the speaker's office or in the governor's office. I don't even know I wasn't in the room. I was on the floor taking time. That was a real team effort. The negotiations were ongoing throughout the entire session, and they were ongoing during the debate. They were ongoing between the debate, and so there were many of us that were in here just taking time so that those things could happen. I know we have a justice reform package this year. I imagine that will be an all hands on deck sort of situation again, and we'll see the true nonpartisan nature of the unicameral. Oh, Senator Kavanaugh, I apologize about the handwriting comment. I think you have many wonderful attributes. You inherited your father's handwriting, however. So yeah, I think that there's going to be some great opportunities, and I hope that members of the body join in on those opportunities, especially if you are a freshman. Like, that's the real kind of time to have fun and get in the mix, is when everybody needs help with you taking time, and you can help take time so that the people that are working on something really impactful and substantive for the state can have the opportunity to make that happen. In some ways, you could look at that's what Senator Hunt and I are doing for everybody right now. We are giving you time to get some substantive conversations and debate and negotiations going on the things that you care about. So I would encourage you to utilize that opportunity. So I don't want to start back on the deposition and have it be super truncated. So I'll wait until
1 minute.
it's time in the queue. But one of the reasons that I keep going back to the deposition is because I think an important topic to the state and to the institution is to continue the conversation around our procurement process. We have a severely flawed procurement process, and I think it was like the second day of session or maybe the third day of session where I received a letter from HHS with a $64,000 bill for a records request that I had made, and it was around a procurement issue. I'm continuing to work with them on that records request. I still haven't gotten the records, but we're trying to more narrowly define it so that they don't feel the need to charge me $64,000 and I don't feel the need to take them to court. So compromise. Look at that. I think I'm about out of time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Duncan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Thank you, Mr. President. One difference that I think is generational, and I think came through loud and clear in the debate last Wednesday and Thursday about LB 574, is that over the generations, as acceptance of LGBTQ plus identities has increased, it's become less of a big deal, and it's become less traumatizing for people with these identities, and it's also become less challenging for their families and loved ones. Senator, I don't want to get it wrong. I know Senator Clemens shared several stories. I think that Senator, someone sitting over here, I don't want to get it wrong, shared the same story. A couple of you read the same 2 or 3 stories several times because you weren't listening to each other or the debate, but you shared stories about people in their 80s who had been traumatized because they were gender expansive or gay or trans, but they never even had the space or the safety or the affirmation to realize what that is. If anything, maybe it's not that. But because they were never supported by their families and loved ones or their schools or their communities, as is more the case today, they associate gender expansive exploration and transition as traumatic. And that says more about the types of discrimination that people experience than a reason for discriminating against them. You know, depression and trauma and negative feelings that LGBTQ plus people experience is a consequence of discrimination, Senator Kauth. It's not a reason for discrimination. We don't say these people have trauma and went through difficult things, so we shouldn't allow any of them to have this identity. Which, you know, frankly, is part of a lot of my opposition, well, all of my opposition to Senator Luann Linehan's bill to allow tax credits for private Christian schools. Because we cannot be having taxpayer money going to schools that allow caregivers, teachers, staff, faculty who discriminate willingly, proudly, and openly against these kids to benefit from public dollars that are meant to serve everybody, that are meant to go to public schools where people aren't able to discriminate like that. Because if you talk to any child in Nebraska, children don't hate gay people. Children don't care. It doesn't matter to them at all. It wouldn't matter anything to a second grader or a third grader or a fourth grader or an eighth grader or anybody if I was their teacher and I had a picture on my desk of my husband and my kids or my wife and my kids. They would say, cute family. It's not confusing for them. It's not weird. And it's the same with their non-binary and gender expansive peers. My son was talking to somebody a couple days ago, and they were kind of coming from a my generation and above experience where coming out can be very traumatic. Like people, and this still happens, of course, people lose their family, people lose their community support, people can get kicked out of their homes, become homeless.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President, which is less the case today. But they were asking my son, so do people bully you? Have your teachers bullied you? Do you have trouble in school? And of course, I was worried about this too in the beginning, big time. And what he said, without a second of hesitation, he goes, no, I have a lot of friends. All my friends are really nice. All my teachers are really nice. The only people who really say anything bad about me are the people who work with my mom. Now, what does that say, colleagues? Are you guys proud of yourselves? He said, the only people who really say anything bad about me are lawmakers. And this could not be more reflective of the younger generations in our country and where they are looking at as a place where they actually have a future. And for these young people, how can we act in this legislature in Nebraska to ensure that these young people do see Nebraska as a place where they will
Time,
be
Senator.
welcome? Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Holdcroft would like to recognize 72 fourth grade students from Gretna Elementary School in Gretna, Nebraska. They are located in the north balcony. Students, please stand and be recognized by your legislature. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized. This is your last opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. I wonder if Senator Hunt will yield to a question.
Senator Hunt, will you yield?
Yes.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. I think sometimes people hear a little bit better on the floor when we ask each other questions. You were just talking about your son and that interview. Could you restate what he told them about how he's treated in school versus otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, I was worried about him getting bullied too. This is like, we got to be careful what we say here, but I feel like no parent who learns that their kid is going to have a harder time in life is thrilled by that news. It doesn't mean you don't love them and accept them and you're going to do anything for them, but you know, your kid doesn't come out to you and you go, oh, thank God, I was hoping for this. This is the best news. Nobody, I mean, I don't think it would be common to do that. And I did not do that. I had to process that for quite a while, but I was very worried about him getting bullied in school. And when he was asked about that, like, do you get bullied in school? Have you been left out of things? Have people said things to you, use slurs toward you? Which me, as a white, cisgender, conventionally attractive, somewhat semi-cool, bisexual teen, I got bullied really bad. I actually didn't go to high school for most of my senior year because I was dealing with so many mental health challenges and depression because of the bullying. My son said he doesn't experience anything like that. And I haven't seen it either, frankly. I mean, the teachers are all supportive. They got the pronouns like that, no problem. And now everyone's used to it. It's no big deal. No one cares. The teachers like that he's a good student, that he does his homework, that he helps other kids with their homework. His friends all like him. He has a very diverse friends group because he does lots of different activities. So he's in several different little cliques like they can do. And, you know, he has crushes. He has clubs. He started a club for writers called the Young Author Society, which I'm really proud of. And he said, no one at school has bullied me. I never get bullied. The only people who say anything bullying are the people who work with my mom, are lawmakers. And he doesn't think that because I come home and tell him that. I am not the parent that comes home and goes, hi, sweetie, for the 10 minutes that we're going to be able to spend together today, since I'm working in the legislature, let me tell you about all the nasty things people said about you. I'm not the parent or anything that's going to go do that. He doesn't hear that from me. He hears it from you guys in the news, in your own words. And he heard it in the hearing because he came and testified against this bill in person. And he heard all the things Senator Reapy was saying. He heard the things that people on the committee were saying, Senator Ben Hansen. He saw how Senator Ben Hansen cut off debate. And that makes an impression on kids. That makes an impression on children and young people who, you know, all of you and your behavior is contributing to my son's conviction that he will not stay in Nebraska. And I asked him, why aren't you more worried about LB 574? You don't seem that stressed about it. We expect them to get bullied. We expect them to be stressed, and they're fine because they're resilient and fine. But he said, well, I don't really care about this bill because it's not going to affect me because I'm not going to live in Nebraska. And I said, well, what about all the other people who have to live in Nebraska who are going to be affected by this? And he said, well, that's why I came and testified.
That's a good kid.
1
I
minute.
just thought, what more can we ask of anybody? That's what Senator Ernie Chambers always said to me. He said, if you do your best, how can anybody ask any more of you? How can I ask more of my child? He's taking care of himself by saying, look at the culture in this state. I can't live here or I'll lose my mind. Good for you for realizing that. And second, he's saying, but while I am here, I'm going to use the power I have to do something for the people who don't have that privilege. And he did it. And then he went back to school and did his homework and is minding his business. Like, how much more can we ask of people? I'm proud.
That's a great kid. Thank you for sharing
Thank
that.
you.
I appreciate that. I think sometimes we lose track of what we're saying on the mic, and I just wanted to make sure we elevated that conversation because Ash is very impressive. So thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Senator Day, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is a really interesting conversation to me because I think I have two boys, they're 10 and 14, and I'm 41 years old. And so I grew up in a similar environment to Senator Hunt. She's a little younger than I am, in high school. And the level of general acceptance in terms of sexual orientation and gender identity when I was in high school was not great. Kids were regularly bullied for, the smallest of things. And learning now how kids that are in middle school and high school view differing sexual orientation or gender identity it's so completely different in how easily these kids just accept each other for who they are. I have even learned from my own son, who, you would typically think he's a young 14-year-old cisgender white kid that comes from Millard. He plays different sports. He's a jock. He gets good grades. And would typically fall into the group of kids you would think that would look down upon other kids that are different from them. But my son has taught me, I remember one specific incident where we were traveling this summer and we were staying at Great Wolf Lodge with the kids for a couple of nights. And I mistakenly misgendered someone that was working there. And I was there with my son, Canyon. And we walked away from that incident and he immediately looked at me and told me, Mom, do you know what you just did? And I was like, no, Canyon, what happened? And he told me how embarrassed he was and how upset he was with me. This young man is 14 years old and has more emotional intelligence than almost all of the adults in this room. He told me how upset he was and how embarrassed he was. And I took him back and I went and I apologized to the young woman. But it was that incident that made me really realize how differently this is looked at by Gen Z and Gen Y, and just sometimes how out of touch older generations are with the world in general and what's happening. I think we continue to see this thing where older generations look down on younger generations. It's always the typical, the younger generation doesn't want to work and they want everything handed to them and they all think they're special. And you hear it from generation to generation of the one just beneath them is the ones that are going to ruin society. And it never comes to fruition. We actually tend to just progress in the right direction. And so this conversation is really fascinating to me in that what we think of as adults who are in our 40s, 50s, 60s, some of us 70s, there might even be some people in their 80s in here, I'm not sure, what the world looks like and our worldview when it comes to things like the LGBTQ community is so completely out of touch with reality. And especially when we're talking about legislation, right? We would be implementing a law in 2023 that is going to affect future generations.
1 minute.
Meaning a lot of you in the room are never going to be affected by any of the things that you do in here. The kids who genuinely look at each other and accept each other for who they are going to be the ones who are screwed by the pieces of legislation that we're attempting to ram through this session. And so I find it really interesting. One second. I find it a really interesting conversation just about the generational divide when we talk about a million different things, but especially when we're talking about gender orientation or sexual orientation, gender identity, just how differently kids view each other from that perspective. And I think that we are long past due time to get our stuff together and start learning how to accept
Time,
people.
Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Breezy would like to recognize approximately 30 members from the Nebraska State Athletic Trainers Association from across Nebraska. They are located in the South Balcony. Members, please rise and be welcomed by your legislature. Senator Raybold, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I really appreciate the dialogue and debate that we're having this morning. And I know this afternoon we're going to be talking about income tax package, corporate tax package, child care tax credits, Social Security tax credits. And I really want to thank Senator Linehan for organizing a briefing this morning. I think it was truly very informative for the senators, very helpful, but also just to alert fellow Nebraskans that are watching today that we are going to be talking about cutting income taxes. And I think it's important that we all pay attention. I want to commend Senator Bostar for being a tireless advocate for child care tax credits. We know that families in Nebraska are really struggling, particularly when both parents work outside the home, to try to find affordable daycare if they're lucky. First of all, to get into a daycare center and to make sure that they can afford it. I've heard from so many young families how they struggle. You know, one parent's entire income goes to pay for childcare. And, you know, Senator Bostar is a true advocate for child care tax credits. I've often said that wouldn't it be if the governor did, in addition to his very transformative education funding initiative, if we could do the same for child care tax credit, if we could allow young families to be able not to be burdened by paying for child care and give them additional tax credits. Think of what an amazing plan and policy that would be to not only retain our young families in our state, but to really attract more families wanting to come to a state that was so progressive on recognizing that this will be a tremendous help to our workforce. The one thing that I want to point out too about the overall income tax package, and again, I am citing the Institute of Taxation and Economic Policy and their research that was done in March of 2023. In LB 754, it calls out that the vast majority of the benefits of cutting income tax rates go to the wealthiest 20% of Nebraskans. And I know that gives me great pause. And I really want the folks out there that will be listening this afternoon to weigh in on this, because we know economically that when you put cash and tax reduction in the hands of low, modest means, middle income families, that's where those dollars get spent. And they have a economic generator factor about for every dollar you give back to them, it generates about $7 worth of economic growth in that community. And that's what we want to see. But it only happens when you give those refunds to low and middle income class. The wealthiest income class doesn't have a propensity to spend it. The good news is they invest it, but they don't really pour it back into their local economy. And that's what we need to be mindful going forward. According to the ITEP, Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, they say very little of the package is targeted to low and middle income Nebraskans, and the average tax cut for the majority of Nebraskans is really tiny when compared to the tax savings that higher paid Nebraskans would receive.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. And so I ask the fellow Nebraskans that are out there listening to really dig into this and ask some tough questions. Is this tax package sustainable for the short and long term? Right now, we're experiencing inflation. That impacts businesses and how many projects they're going to take on. We know the interest rate is increasing. That has a great deal of impact. We know that there's tremendous volatility in the stock market. That gives everyone pause. And so for these reasons and a few others, I ask fellow Nebraskans just to keep your eyes open on what this tax package does. I'm all for things that benefit our families, low and middle income families, but keep your eye out on this. You know, what we do is like, how can we attract and retain young families? How can we attract and retain our existing businesses and corporations? And it's something that I hope folks out there that are listening will certainly ask the tough questions of all senators, myself included. So thank you,
Senator.
Mr. President.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak. This is your last opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think if Senator Hunt wanted time, I would yield it to her, but I just would quickly point out that in the context of the broader conversation we've been having, we've got some folks from the Nebraska Association of Behavioral Health Organizations out there talking about the need for behavioral health care in the state. And I think that's been kind of a central point of the broader conversation we've had this year, and making sure that we are adequately funding these resources so people have access to behavioral health care. And I just thought that would be good. So if you have an opportunity to go out and talk to folks, I know they're pulling people out to talk about it. So take that opportunity if you've got it, when there's plenty of time to go do something else. So if Senator Hunt, I would yield my remainder of my time to Senator Hunt.
4 minutes, 15 seconds, Senator Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. President. We're talking about a generational gap. I have some other thoughts I wanted to share about this. I think that this is common for a lot of things. It didn't take as long for the general public sentiment around being gay to shift, as long as it took the law to shift. Public approval and acceptance and affirmation of gay men and lesbian women was in place long before the marriage equality, the Obergefell decision in the Supreme Court. And I think that we are going to see the same trajectory for trans Americans. I really hope so. I am personally not a believer in that Martin Luther King quote that says, the arc of justice, or what is it? The arc of the universe bends toward justice. This is something that advocates repeat often when times are tough, when it looks like we're not making a lot of progress. We say, well, the arc of the universe bends towards justice, as in we might not see justice tomorrow, but we're going to keep working on it and eventually it'll come. I don't personally actually believe in that. I think that progress and justice is an action, not an inevitability. I don't think that it's inevitable that right and just things are going to happen. And the reason I think that is, just from being in the legislature for 5 years, you see how public sentiment can swing one way and the radical people who are elected to represent them swing the other way. And it's social movement and backlash, this cycle over and over and over again. But one common thing that we hear people who don't understand trans identities say. It's the same thing we used to hear people say about gay identities, which some people still say, which is things like, why, Senator Groney used to always say this, why are you making everything about sex? Nobody cares who you sleep with. And then with this bill 574 from Senator Kauth, it's turned into don't sexualize kids. You're sexualizing children. And then that morphs into this groomer accusations and pedophile accusations and stuff like that. When really I would earnestly submit that the people introducing these bills are the ones sexualizing kids. You know, they say things like, I have no problem with LGBTQ people, but why do you have to talk about sex so much? Nobody cares who you have sex with. But I would imagine that in reverse. You know, when someone heterosexual, when, you know, a friend says in front of a child, I went out with a guy to a movie last weekend, or my husband and I are having a picnic today, or I'm pregnant, I'm expecting a child, or you're invited to my baby shower. We never say, stop talking about sex. But to hear what you're saying to the LGBTQ community, don't you see that that's the same exact thing? Me putting a picture on my desk of my wife makes some of you come by and think about sex. What does that say about you? Trans kids existing makes some of you think about sex. What does that say about you? They aren't thinking about that. It's not a function of sexuality the way that you guys experience that as adults. And when LGBTQ plus people talk about their normal lives, going on a picnic, going to a baby shower, expecting a child, getting married, going on a date, many people sexualize that for no reason. And we're doing the same thing to kids with this bill, LB 574. That's why I think this is so toxic for raising the temperature politically.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator McKinney, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of LB 376. And I rise because a bill that would deal with hair discrimination in schools that would affect kids that look like my daughter that wear braids is off the agenda now because of the filibuster. And we got to be honest, we're talking about a racial understanding gap across all party lines. I support all efforts to protect all kids in this state. I never supported that trans bill, and I think it's a horrible bill. But it's clear many people do not understand Black identities. So for the past week or so, I've been trying to figure out, what do I really say? I keep saying I'm frustrated and all these type of things. So I've been trying to listen. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks about discipline, listening to, past interviews and things from Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and many other people, just to try to balance myself, to try to really define what I really want to say. And this morning on my drive down here, I started listening to the letter from the Birmingham jail. And in this, Dr. King said in one piece of it, and I probably quote some more, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And with that bill being removed, it is highly possible Black kids that wear braids, dreads, afros, puffs, all those type of things will have to wait for us in this body to ensure that those kids would not be discriminated against. The Native American families that came because their child had their hair cut will have to wait again. Wait. That is my issue. I have no issue with being outraged that this body would even discuss a bill about trans kids and discriminating against them. It's horrible. But like, I had to come in this body after this body decided to remove slavery out of a teaching of education last year. I had to move on and fight and keep fighting. But I didn't try to stop everybody's bill. I didn't filibuster every bill. I didn't kill bills that needed to be passed. That is my frustration. When it comes to Black people, it's always wait. It'll get better. We'll figure it out. And that's across both party lines. Honestly, it is. I feel like I'm stuck, like, it's just frustrating, honestly. And he also said in a letter in the Birmingham jail, I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers.
1 minute.
First, I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you and your goal, but wait. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McKinney. Senator Duncan, you're open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will yield my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 55 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator McKinney, from a summary space, the truth is that the community I'm fighting for is your community. And the facts are that if this bill passes, LB 574, although we are advocating for trans people, the people who will be most impacted by that bill are Black and brown trans people in this state. The trans youth in the justice system, whether that's juvenile justice or in the adult carceral system, the Black and brown trans people in that system make up a large population from Senator McKinney's district. So is there an opportunity to look at the systemic impact of these bills instead of looking at these bills as one-off issues and look at the systemic impact of all of these things together? The folks who are showing up to testify on these bills look a certain way, right? So we've been able to classify this issue as a white issue. But the truth of the matter is that it's not. There are Black and brown trans folks who are incarcerated, who are coming home from incarceration, folks in juvenile detention, folks in North Omaha who are in there they've been in there their whole lives and they don't even show up to advocate because they feel like folks have divested. So the accountability and the call-in with care that I want to do, that I want to offer, is that we are advocating for the same community, Senator McKinney. Queer and trans Black people are Black folks, and it's unfortunate that Black people in Nebraska have had to compromise to get what they need, and it's important for us to divest from that. It's terrible that we've had a whole community have to acquiesce so much to get so little. So let's name that and not perpetuate that any further. By doing that now, we are absolutely serving the LGBTQ community, but we're also engaging in liberation work for Black and brown trans people in this community. The data and the numbers are there. We know that Black and brown people are the ones most affected by bills like LB 574. And, we have the Opportunity Campus from Black and Pink in Senator McKinney's district. What do you think the people who populate that building are going to look like? Those are trans and gender expansive people. We have Blackburn, North, Benson High School, the number of trans and gender nonconforming people who are there. It's very prevalent. The data and the numbers are there. And it's completely disgusting and wrong that an entire community has had to sacrifice and compromise for decades to get what they deserve, and we haven't even given them that. That anything they even get from us is based in scarcity. And I want to say that we need to end that with this issue. I want to say that when I'm talking about queer and trans people, I'm first and foremost talking about Black and brown queer and trans people. So let's not act oblivious and do harm to another community because harm was done historically. All of these things are connected to white supremacy and patriarchy and freedom and liberation. And to hear Senator McKinney say things like, we have compromised, we've had to, pick up and move on anyway. It's a statement of hurt and harm. And we can name that, and we can say that that never should have happened. But we can't utilize historic harm to do future harm or position this conversation to be rooted in the inherent inclusion of Black and brown people if we're saying that trans folks are Black and brown people. Thank you, Mr. President. What? Did I yield my time? You told me that was time.
Oh, 1 minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sorry, I thought you said time. This never should have happened to this community. We can't do future harm to the same community because historic harm was done. And if we're saying trans folks, we're saying Black and brown people. That's explicitly what we're talking about. And these populations are prevalent in North Omaha. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Day, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mentioned this a little bit yesterday, and again, we have to be careful what we say because it's not my place to tell Senator McKinney how he should feel about anything. But number one, we don't set the schedule. The speaker sets the schedule. So if the speaker wanted to put the bill on the agenda and move it in front of the others, he could. And he has chosen not to do that. And that has nothing to do with us. And number two, if there was a bill that was introduced that was moving through stages of debate that 33 people voted for on cloture to take healthcare away from you and your family or your children, and you were filibustering that, and we asked you to sit down, you would be enraged by that. I understand the frustration. This has happened in previous sessions where I have had a bill on the schedule and wanted to get to it, and we couldn't because of an ongoing filibuster. It is incredibly frustrating. I understand what he's saying, but we are not the ones that set the schedule here. And again, everybody knew what was going to happen. We talked about this. It was talked about for dozens of days, for several weeks before that vote on Thursday. Everybody knew what was going to happen, and it happened. And there's people in this body that when they say they're going to do something, they follow through on it. And that's what's happening. Please be mad at the right people. I wanted to go back to what we were talking about earlier with the generational issues in terms of acceptance of people who are different. And essentially my ramblings on the mic earlier were basically me just saying that a lot of times we discredit kids and we look at them as less than and their ideas as less than, and they have less value inherently. And unfortunately, we miss out on a lot
of opportunities to learn when we do that. These kids are growing up in a completely different world than the one that we grew up in terms of so many different things. And I think if we are continuing to discredit children and their perspectives on the world, we're missing out on a huge opportunity to really understand the world around us a little bit better. I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 1 minute, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, since Brandon Tina in Nebraska, the second biggest harm that's happened to a trans woman in Nebraska was to a Latinx woman a few months ago who is now paralyzed. When Opportunity Campus opens in Terrell's district in the heart of North Omaha, what do you think those folks are going to look like? It's trans women living in the Leiden House coming out of incarceration. So again, from a summary space, these are the people that we're fighting for. The data and numbers are there. And my aim is to stop perpetuating harm. And I would like one of you to join me in that by not voting either yourself or as a block on LB 574. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Vargas would like to welcome 14 community organizers from the Heartland Workers Center, which includes Omaha, Columbus, and Fremont. They are seated in the south balcony. Please stand and be recognized. Senator Raybould, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to switch topics here quickly on a matter that we're going to be dealing with this afternoon. And for the fellow Nebraskans that are watching, you know, tax cuts are important. But I think for the state of Nebraska, everything I've done as a business owner throughout my 35 years of working in business, construction, development, and of course, trying to bring economic growth to the communities that we're in, I always proceed cautiously. And I have asked the Revenue Committee, you know, tell me a little bit more about what is the motivation. As a business owner, business person, I asked, like, what is the return on investment for some of these tax cuts, corporate income tax cuts? How will we know that the state is actually growing and benefiting from this? And then I also asked, you know, what are some of the lessons we've learned from other states that have implemented these types of corporate and income tax cuts? And I asked, you know, can you share with me your findings for the state of Kansas, the state of Oklahoma, and the state of North Carolina? Because I, as a business person, look to the impact of these type of actions have on other states and how they have weathered them or how it has improved their labor market and economic growth. And again, I'm going to cite the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and they look at the Kansas study. And, you know, we talk about and make fun, like, what's the matter with Kansas? Well, I think Kansas had to learn some really, really tough lessons when they did it. It says Kansas provides compelling evidence of failure of supply side tax cuts. And they go on to say the deep income cuts that Kansas enacted in 2012 and 2013 for many business owners and other high-income Kansans failed to achieve their goal of boosting business formation and job creation. And lawmakers substantially repealed the tax cuts earlier this year. This is from 2018. Former supporters have offered explanations for this failure to prevent the Kansas experience from discrediting supply-side economic strategies and more broadly. But the evidence does not support these explanations. Rather, the Kansas experiment adds to the already compelling evidence that cutting taxes does not improve state economic performances. And so as we move forward in this dialogue and debate on corporate and income tax cuts, we have to ask tough questions. What is the return on investment for our Nebraska taxpayers? We'd like to hear more about that. I'm going to move on to Oklahoma, and here's what it said about Oklahoma. Tax cuts drain on revenues would stifle Oklahoma's economic growth. Again, it says the bills the Oklahoma House has passed to cut corporate and individual taxes wouldn't boost state economic growth or stimulate new business investment as intended. Even if lower taxes were the economic driver, the bill's authors seem to think they are. The state is already well situated from that perspective, and it is likelier the bill's drain on revenues would harm Oklahoma schools, services, and workforce quality, thereby discouraging future investment. So, fellow Nebraskans, if you're watching, get this on your radar, do your own research, and we will be having a really good debate this afternoon on this matter. And I would like to yield the rest of my time to Senator Megan Hunt, if she would like it.
Senator Hunt, 1 minute, 13 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the time, Senator Raybould. Last night, Senator Jacobson was accusing me of, quote, I wrote it down because it was wild, quote, rejecting values of those of us who live in rural Nebraska and who actually believe in Christianity. Rejecting the values of those of us who live in rural Nebraska who actually believe in Christianity. Notice the linguistics here. The guy is using name calling. This is George W. Bush stuff and stuff that Trump epitomized as well, which is saying, are you with us or against us? Are you a patriot? Are you a Christian? Do you support farmers? And it's like you don't know what you're talking about. You're just using all of these labels as code without understanding what you're actually talking about. That supporting the trans health care bill.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Raybould and Senator Hunt. Senator Frederickson, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to Senator Hunt.
Senator Hunt, 4 minutes, 53 seconds.
President, thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Frederickson. So for Senator Jacobson to accuse me of, quote, rejecting the values of those of us who live in rural Nebraska who actually believe in Christianity, what else is he saying linguistically there by saying that? He's saying that urban people can't be actual Christians, that if you live in the vast metropolis of Lincoln, Nebraska or Omaha, Nebraska, and you can't be a real Christian, and quote unquote actually real Christian. And is he saying that rural people are not actually supportive of LGBTQ people? Because that's not what I hear every single day, all day, phones, email, messages, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, snail mail. I hear from people in rural Nebraska every day who are supportive of their LGBTQ neighbors and family members. So when he's using this coded language, rural values who actually believe in Christianity, what is he talking about? He's talking about nothing real or rooted in reality or people's actual experiences. He's using coded, divisive language to characterize rural people as moral Christians and urban people like me as, godless people with no moral rudder. And that's not true at all. It's insulting to the Christians in my district. It's insulting to the Christians in urban parts of Nebraska. And it's very insulting and demeaning to the intelligence of most rural Nebraskans who don't want to see their LGBTQ peers and community members and family and kids and neighbors discriminated against by him. What he's talking about, colleagues, isn't Christianity. What he's talking about is Christian nationalism, because there's no tenet of Christianity that says you have to hate your neighbor, that you have to reject people in the trans community. As far as my reading of Christian text goes, that's pretty much the opposite of what Christianity teaches. It's impossible to follow the Jesus of the scriptures while refusing refugees, expelling immigrants, demonizing Muslims, vilifying people of color, worshiping power, neglecting the poor, and rejecting people who aren't like you. And he said he was insulted. If he thinks it's insulting, he can be insulted. Be insulted then. That's your feelings. I think I would argue that this country isn't actually Christian enough. All of the things that some of you are trying to do to put God back in our schools. You think if you write "In God We Trust" on the outside of a building, it's going to do something to the moral fiber of the people in our state. When what you're doing with your own power here in the legislature is turning around to legalize discrimination, to further the ostracization of a minority group that has no lobby out in the rotunda, that has nobody, here representing a huge special interest for them, not in the way that farmers have, not in a way that quote unquote rural people have. So ask yourself, are these things, Senator Jacobson, that you really believe, or is this feeding into your persecution complex?
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Where you are only righteous if you're in the minority, in which you are persecuted because you are Christian. None of that is real. None of that is actually happening. Nobody is persecuting you. Nobody is trying to pass a law to say what you can and can't do with your own body. Nobody's trans identity is affecting you negatively in any way. Nobody's marriage is doing anything to your marriage. And nobody in Nebraska is asking us to make this a priority. We have a unique opportunity this year with so many funds. We can put some things away for a rainy day. We can do something about school funding. We can do something about special education needs in this state. And we can do something for workforce retention. And I would seriously and earnestly submit to you, colleagues, that doing something for workforce retention is killing LB 574.
That's time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Frederickson and Senator Hunt. Senator Day, you're recognized to speak, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Going back to the discussion about generational divide between young people and those of us here in the room, and even the older generation, we're missing out on a huge opportunity when we discount kids and their thoughts and the world that they're growing up in as irrelevant or unimportant. And I think it's an important piece of making policy decisions in terms of the fact that the legislation that we create and we pass is going to directly affect kids who are now 9, 10, 14, 18. These are the ones that are going to have to live through the generations of these bills once they are passed into law. And many of us in the room will be long gone when the effects of bills like LB 574 come to fruition. I found a really great article here from the Organization of American Historians about how the old can learn from the young. How can the historical study of aging benefit from what historians have learned by studying youth? As someone who has spent more than 40 years learning about young people, I think that there is quite a lot of overlap between the two kinds of historical inquiry. This is true for two reasons. Youth and old age are categories grounded in biology but defined by culture, and the fruitful areas of investigation historians of youth have opened are ones from which scholars of old age can learn. We've come a long way from assuming that there is something stable and fixed about life cycle experiences that are dependent on biology. Youth is a very nimble category, a shapeshifter that has changed quite a bit over time. As a result, not only is how we define youth changeable, but we are also alert to the fact that age categories have fluid boundaries. Modern institutions like high schools and colleges and Social Security, Medicare tend to define youth as between ages of 14 and 22, and the elderly as those over 65, but these limits can and do change. Policies regulating Social Security can affect the age of retirement, and therefore, when we think we become elderly, from the age of 66 today to 70 in some future administration. Birth certificates in the United States, as well as old age insurance and high school attendance by the vast majority of Americans, are products of the 20th century, as is our tendency to use fixed ages to define both. Youth is embedded in how societies are organized and influences law and social policies. It is also imprinted in psychological beliefs and medical practices. The way we categorize and think about youth and our modern emphasis on age segregation has affected the development of institutions such as schools and courts, concepts of justice and emotional development, brain function, and sexuality. In studying youth, we have to examine the institutions in which this age group is given meaning and influences its development, such as family, church, and school. It means that we have to grapple with questions of friendship, marriage, and work. I think that something similar is true for those whom we categorize as elderly and old. Of course, youth is not just a product of culture, but once set apart, influences and creates culture. In the 20th century, young people as cultural actors have had a very large role in determining patterns of consumption in music, clothing, media, and language. In this way, they are important participants.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. In this way, they are important participants in the modern consumer economy. And youth have influenced sexual mores and politics in ways that have sometimes disrupted efforts at social control. I thought that sentence was really great. Youth have influenced sexual mores and politics in ways that have sometimes disrupted efforts at social control. The study of aging, too, has the potential to enlarge our understanding of these matters. As a historical phenomenon, old age is not entirely new, but it is coming into its own in part because of the substantial aging of the population in the West and the considerable extension in life expectancy. Our interest in aging grows from present-day concerns, much as the interest in youth and youth culture became compelling in the context of the 1960s, when a baby boom in large populations settled into high schools and colleges and began to make its presence felt. This sent some of us, myself.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Senator Linehan, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I was hoping Senator Rabel would still be here because when I was in exec committee on the balcony, I heard her talking about taxes and the tax bill. And I was hoping she'd be here so I can answer her questions, but I don't see her. Earlier this year, in the beginning, we passed a rule that the introducer of a bill will get a chance to introduce the bill and talk about the bill before somebody could get up and complain about the bill. So when we have a rule, it's not just the rule like, you know, we don't have lawyers running around here making sure we're following the rules, but there's an intent there that the introducer gets to talk about the bill first. And this is a Revenue Committee priority bill that's coming up this afternoon, and I'll be able to answer all those questions. But I thought we were on this bill. So I'm confused, and I will stay on the floor now. As long as we're here, somebody has questions about the tax bill, I would ask that we wait till this afternoon when we're on the tax bill, or come to talk to me because I'm right here, and I've been here all morning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Seeing no one left in the queue, Senator Hunt, you are welcome to close on your bracket motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to wrap up my comments that I was sort of on a roll with on my last time on the mic. The comment that my values reject the values of people who live in rural Nebraska who are real Christians, as Senator Jacobson said, is really unacceptable and insulting to rural Nebraskans, insulting to urban Nebraskans, very weird to divide the state like that and say that there's one type of morality and it only exists out in the country or something. But another thing he said and talked about quite a bit was that we're moving the goalpost. And I would like to understand what he meant by that. To say that we're moving the goalpost is very rich when yesterday we literally had a debate to change the rules. which when we talk about, the idiom moving the goalpost, if you Google what that idiom means, it means changing the rules in the middle of debate. Everything is projection. Look in the mirror, look at yourself. Who is moving the goalpost? We said 6 weeks ago, LB 574 can't pass. It deserves to be treated like the bill that it is, unserious, bigoted, divisive, and a person in a real leadership position would have done that. We would find a way out of that, and we're not there because now it's clear that discrimination and bigotry is a priority of this body, and you're saying it out loud. Speaker Arch, I would like a call of the House and a roll call vote. Thank you.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
12 ayes, 1 nay to place the House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senator Albright, Senator Wishart, Kauth, Armendariz, McKinney, Bostar, Wayne, Erdman, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senators Albright, Wishart, Kauth, McKinney, and Wayne, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Hunt, we are missing Senator Wishart and Senator Kauth. Would you like to proceed or wait? Senator Wishart, Senator Kauth, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. Senator Kauth, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. Mr. Clerk, roll call.
Senator Aguilar, Senator Albright, voting no. Senator Arch, voting no. Senator Armendariz, voting no. Senator Ballard, voting no. Senator Blood, voting no. Senator Bostar, voting no. Senator Bostelman, voting no. Senator Brandt, voting no. Senator Brewer, voting no. Senator Breezy, Senator John Kavanaugh, voting no. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, not voting. Senator Clements, Voting no, Senator Conrad. Voting no, Senator Day. Voting no, Senator DeBoer. Voting no, Senator DeKay. Voting no, Senator Dorn. Voting no, Senator Dover. Voting no, Senator Dungan. Voting no, Senator Erdman. Voting no, Senator Frederickson. Voting no, Senator Geist. Voting no, Senator Holleran. Voting no, Senator Hansen. Voting no, Senator Hardin. Voting no, Senator Holcroft. Voting no, Senator Hughes. Voting no, Senator Hunt. Voting no, Senator Ibaugh. Voting no, Senator Jacobson. Voting no, Senator Kauth. Voting no, Senator Linehan. Voting no, Senator Lippincott. Voting no, Senator Lowe. Voting no, Senator McDonald. Voting no, Senator McKinney. Voting no, Senator Mosier. Voting no, Senator Merman. Voting no, Senator Raybold. Voting no, Senator Reapy. Voting no, Senator Sanders. Voting no, Senator Slama. Voting no, Senator Vargas. Senator Von Gillern. Voting no, Senator Walls. Voting no, Senator Wayne. Voting no, Senator Wishart. Voting no. Vote is 0 A's, 45 nays, Mr. President.
The motion fails. Mr. Clerk, for the next motion, I raise the call.
Mr. President, Senator Hunt would move to recommit Legislative Bill 376 to committee.
Senator Hunt, you're welcome to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think one reason that so many of you are fixated on LB 574 to the degree that you're not willing to negotiate, you're not willing to compromise, and you're willing to blow up the entire rest of the session for the opportunity to hate, discriminate, exercise bigotry, and make the lives of trans and gender expansive kids in Nebraska more difficult. I think the reason why some of you move things along is that you don't want to have an actual argument about this issue because you lose on the merits of the argument. And a lot of times you don't even understand the merits of the argument because you've drank the Kool-Aid. And when you're given these bills to support, you don't want to understand the science. You just want to move it along. And it's the same exact way with the abortion stuff. Remember when we had that bill from Senator Albright, the abortion reversal bill, which is complete pseudoscience, backed by no research that's serious. It's based on this study, which I shouldn't even call it a study, from this quack doctor named Dr. George Delgado, who's a palliative care doctor. He's not an OBGYN. He's not specializing in reproductive health in any way or women's health. He's just an anti-abortion MD, which to you guys is gold. That's like your favorite thing when you find someone in the healthcare community who's willing to take your pseudoscientific, no evidence, no medical reason behind it, no research behind it types of ideas. And what happened with that bill was we ended up putting into statute that if someone is getting abortion care with a medication abortion and they take the first pill, that the doctor administering this care has to tell them that there's some language in statute that's like they have to say this word for word or something. Like if you act, time is of the essence is the phrase that is funny to me. Time is of the essence, but if you change your mind about an abortion, you can come in and we can give you a pill that will reverse the abortion and increase the chances that you will continue with your pregnancy. What this pill is, this abortion pill, which Dr. Delgado, by the way, is getting rich selling because he's a snake oil salesman who's shopping this bill to different legislatures. All of you in the Nebraska Legislature fell for it. It's Joni Albright's favorite thing to do anything anti-abortion. So, of course, that was what she was excited to do. From this quack doctor who's selling his abortion reversal kits online. So he's made in the shade. He's got a captive audience here for that kind of thing. But what that pill really is just a super dose of progesterone. And what studies actually found, and this was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, not the quack journal that he had his study published in, which, by the way, if you look at the original study that George Delgado published, it was also full of typos and misspellings and grammar errors. On the very front of the study that was published, he spelled San Diego wrong. Like, the guy's not serious, and I can't believe we passed a bill based on anything that he's ever done. But in a real study published in the New England Journal of Medicine that research doctors did, it found that in people who took the abortion reversal pill versus people who took a placebo, the difference was exactly the same. If you take the first abortion pill in the normal course of a medication abortion, you have mifepristone and misoprostol. If you take mifepristone and you don't take misoprostol, you have the same likelihood of continuing your pregnancy as if you took the progesterone pill that Senator Albright and all the rest of you said that we had to put into statute. This is the kind of anti-science, follow the leader, you don't know what you're talking about, stuff that I'm talking about. And you can believe in your heart that abortion is wrong. No one is saying don't do that. The thing is, you can't legislate and put into statute untested experimental treatments that could end up really harming people. Okay, so now you're going to turn around and say, but Senator Hunt, isn't healthcare for trans youth exactly the same thing? Untested experimental healthcare? No, to that I would say, you don't understand how this healthcare actually works. If you were to get your information from Fox News or Breitbart or Newsmax, which I know several of you like to play 24/7 in your businesses, you would be getting misinformation like that. But if you talk to any healthcare provider, dozens of whom testified in opposition to that bill, which Senator Ben Hansen cut off testimony for, and we didn't even get to hear from every expert that wanted to come in and share their experience and knowledge about trans healthcare. That's not how trans healthcare works. It is backed by science, it's backed by decades of results and research, and it's backed by results that you can just see from person to person. The rate of medical regret for people who transition, whether it's a social transition or a medical transition, whether you're taking hormones or you get a surgical procedure, which is less and less common. We know that when people are affirmed as they are, when they are left alone to live life and do what they think is best for them, in conversation with medical providers, their families and support systems, and their faith, that they're much happier people for that. And a lot of you who don't even know a trans person, let alone have held their hand and gone through a process with them or anything like that, why would you know something like that? Nobody would ask you or expect you to know something like that. But what we would expect you to do is listen to the experts who do know. Listen to the dozens of healthcare experts and healthcare providers who came to testify in opposition to that bill, who on any other issue, if we're talking about hearing aids, if we're talking about cancer treatments, if we're talking about opioid addiction, you guys all go out into the lobby and you ask a physician or a healthcare provider or a research how you should vote. You ask them to explain the science to you. But if we're talking about a women's reproductive health care thing or a gay thing, all of a sudden to all of you, the doctors don't know what they're talking about. How is that the best way to make policy? And why are we seeing such a focus in our state legislatures across the country on legislating people's health care? Coming from bodies of elected officials who have no experience or expertise in healthcare or medicine. It makes no sense to me. It is, I know that a lot of you don't actually harbor these feelings. I know a lot of you are worried about being reelected. You're worried about sticking out. It's the same reason a lot of you don't get on the mic, because you don't want to be targeted the way trans youth in Nebraska are targeted. And you don't have the same kind of courage that they have to have and display every single day. I do think it's a little more common for people in younger generations, Gen Z, Gen X, or Gen Y, it doesn't matter. I don't have to name what the generations are. I think it's more common for younger people because they are so affirmed, because they're more likely to have parents and caregivers and schools and loved ones that affirm their identity. And they don't face the same stigma and discrimination that older generations faced, that it's more common for younger people to perhaps do fewer medical interventions, because when they socially transition, when they change their clothes or their name, they are met with more affirmation and acceptance. And so they aren't seeking any other kind of validation. And that's a generational difference in a trans experience, I believe. And certainly as we get older, we do all kinds of different gender affirming things. We get haircuts, we wear makeup, maybe we get Botox and filler and things like that. People, as they get older, they want to look their best in their own eyes, and trans people are exactly the same. But I don't think that there's the same attitude around the necessity of medical transition to be a real trans person among the younger generation. But the way this bill, LB 574, stigmatizes young people who seek care, harms them just by being introduced.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. So I'm going to get back to, actually, I was going to see if Senator, no, I will ask off the mic of the staff if there's other amendments that we need to get to. I like to be mindful of that. But I'll ask that between now and my next time. Okay, so I'm back to the procurement conversation. This is the deposition of Matt Wallen in the lawsuit when we awarded the child welfare contract to St. Francis Ministries. Question, when you became division director then, did you have any, strike that, as division director, do you have any responsibility with respect to procuring services for the division? Answer, yes. Question, what is that responsibility? Answer, to assure that the division has an appropriate service array of services to provide the appropriate services to families and children that come into the care of the department. Question, during your tenure as division director, could you estimate how many procurements of services from private vendors you're aware of or had any responsibility for? Answer, I would say somewhere between 10 and 15 procurements, and likely I would say 30 to 50 contracts or subawards in the child welfare arena, and subawards with, probably over 90 counties for child support enforcement services on part of the 4D program. Question, Mr. Wallen, with respect to the 30 subawards for child welfare and the, strike that, with respect to the 30 or so subawards in child welfare, are those competitively bid contracts? Answer, when I started, they are obviously going back to 2017. They are not competitively awarded. They are basically given on, I would say, a need basis of who can provide services and meet the needs of children and families in a particular service area. So they were not competitively bid. We have moved over the last 2 years to a competitive process. So we have competed or run an RFP or an RFA or an RFQ for a whole host of different services. Question, okay, and was that your decision to begin competitively bidding those subawards for child welfare services? Answer, yes. Question, why did you make that change? Answer, we wanted to improve outcomes and we wanted service providers to provide in response to RFPs, what services they could provide and what outcomes they could achieve. The full intent and purpose of running an RFP was to improve outcomes for children and families. Question, and in your view, the competitive bidding process will help in that objective of improving outcomes? Answer, yes. Question, with respect to the 30 or so subawards in child welfare that you have mentioned, you You started competitively bidding those, and those procured through DAS, are those procured through DAS or DHHS in terms of managing the procurements? Answer, some are managed through DAS and some are managed through DHHS, our own procurement shop. Question, and you mentioned another category of procurements, I believe at the beginning of your comments. As division director, there have been 10 or 15 procurements, is that correct? Answer, Mr. Post, make sure you answer verbal instead of Witness, okay. Mr. Kenny. Question, and of those 10 or 15 procurements, Mr. Wallen, did DHHS manage the procurement on those, or DAS, or was there a mix? It was a combination. Question, could you describe what types of procurements the division will procure itself through DHHS procurement versus DAS? When do you decide to have DAS manage the procurement? Answer,
1 minute.
Answer, it usually depends on workflow and I guess scope of services or complexity of the actual procurement. Question, how do those factors weigh? In other words, you have DAS manage the larger scope, more complex procurements? Answer, that's correct. Question, are you aware of any material differences between DHHS procurement process and the DAS procurement process? Answer, no. Question, is it your understanding that DHHS procurement and DAS procurement have the same ultimate objective? Answer, yes. What is that objective? Answer, to run a fair and open competitive competition for services. I think that's probably a good place to stop, and I will just get back in the queue. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Day, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to read an interview here that was done on NPR about families with trans kids leaving the state. This is from April of last year, and this is specifically about Texas, but I don't think it's far-fetched to imagine the exact same thing is happening here in Nebraska, or will be happening. It says, the Texas governor and attorney general say gender-affirming care for trans kids is child abuse. Some families with trans kids are now relocating to continue the care they say their children need. Rob Schmitz is the host, and he says, some Texas families with trans kids are leaving or are considering leaving the state. That's because Texas Governor Greg Abbott called parents who got their kids gender-affirming care child abusers and said they should be investigated. Houston Public Media's Sarah Willa Ernst reports these families don't see a future in Texas. Sarah Willa Ernst, byline, Mom, Dad, and the kids are huddled in their TV room in Austin. Eyes are glued to a video game. The dad, Brian, is managing the controller, but it's his kids who are the real brains of the operation. Ernst. Brian and his wife Susan are the parents of 5-year-old twins, including a transgender girl who started expressing gender variance at age 2. Ernst. Their daughter has grown out her hair and changed her pronouns. She isn't old enough for puberty blockers, but Brian and Susan are still worried about getting reported to Child Protective Services, which is why they asked we only use their first name. Brian. I don't want to leave. On the other hand, if we had to, I know we'd be okay. Yeah, it's just kind of crummy. Ernst. Only in recent months, conversations about leaving Austin have become plans. That change happened in February when the governor and AG started calling gender-affirming care child abuse. Susan. My worst fear had come true with no warning and no time buffer or anything. Ernst. Fear describes most of the past year for Susan and Brian. They followed bills in the legislature that sought to criminalize gender-affirming care. Those ultimately failed, which led to the governor's directive months later. An injunction currently puts these investigations on hold, but Susan isn't hopeful. Susan. I just can't picture a situation in which this doesn't get worse. Ernst. Susan and Brian, both who work in education, are looking for jobs in states with stronger civil rights protections for trans people. Susan, it never crossed my mind that we would go anywhere else, but I can't do that anymore. Ernst, so now they're preparing to say goodbye to Texas. Susan, I can't think ahead to a time when my kids are older. I can't imagine buying a home. I don't even feel comfortable taking a job here. Ernst. Susan's heartbroken to leave her sister and the kids' grandparents. Moving elsewhere is on the table for many others, says Shelley Skeen with the LGBTQ rights group Lambda Legal. Shelley Skeen, I really can't think of any parent that I've talked to who hasn't considered this. Ernst. But not all the 50 families in her group is working with have the means to relocate. Skeen. It takes a pretty big toll on the family's cause. It takes a pretty big toll on the family because you're taking your kids out of school and you're bringing them to a completely different place. You've got to maintain an apartment. People just can't do that. Rachel, I definitely don't feel like I'm on the other side of it. I wish. Ernst. Rachel, her husband, and their 3 kids are from North Texas. She and the kids have just moved to Colorado. That's because one of the children is non-binary and another is a trans teenager on hormone therapy, the kind of treatment the governor is targeting. Thank you. And because of that, Rachel asked we only use her first name as well. Rachel, the time has been like a slow unraveling of stress. Ernst. They're staying with family until they can find a house. Her husband, who works in IT, is still back in Texas until he can relocate. Rachel, we still have so many things that are in transition. Just feeling really paranoid about, any connections that we have and how those could bite us. Ernst. The difficulty of letting go is balanced by the welcome she feels in Colorado, such as gender-inclusive bathrooms at the school she's considering for her kids. She believes that now her family has a real shot at happy, healthy lives. For NPR News, I'm Sarah Willis Ernst in Houston. And I yield the rest of my time.
Time, Senator. Senator John Kavanaugh, you are recognized to speak.
Oh, boy. Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I've been listening to the conversation. I've been doing some other things. So I appreciate what everybody's been saying, and it's interesting. But I guess, first off, I guess I should go back to talking about, I did show Senator Hunt my handwriting, and though I do appreciate her giving me the benefit of the doubt, after her inspection, she conceded that I do have bad handwriting. It's particularly egregious, and I know we had a conversation at some point earlier this session about left-handedness being something that wasn't accepted for a long time, and then once we accepted left-handedness, that the number of left-handed people became a proliferation, or much more people turned out to be left-handed. What happened to me was my handwriting was so bad in grade school that they assumed I must have been left-handed and was forced to be right-handed. And so then for about a school year, I was forced to be left-handed. And that turned out to be even worse than the right-handed writing. So I went back to right-handed. Just somebody who can't write well, I guess. Like I said, we all have our talents in life, and calligraphy and handwriting is not one of the things that would be not a virtue I bring to the conversation. But I did mention earlier, I talked about the access to mental health care, and we passed Senator Wishart's bill 276 the other day, which was I think is a good step in the right direction. And then we had some other, budgetary requests for funding to make sure that people have access to mental health care. I think that's particularly important in just sort of the broader conversation we're having about this, but it's important as it pertains to criminal justice reform. Access to mental health care is extremely important. My priority bill last year included ensuring that those individuals who, when they were released from custody, who were qualified for Medicaid, would be signed up. The department would facilitate making sure that they got signed up for Medicaid so they could walk out of the facility with a Medicaid card and be able to go get their continued meds, because what generally happens, I guess this bill hasn't gone into effect yet, is when somebody leaves, say, Douglas County Corrections, they go to Douglas County Corrections provides them with a couple weeks, a month of their medication if they have it, and then that person runs through that medication and doesn't refill it because they don't have access to health care. And even though those are individuals who qualify for health care under Medicaid, they have historically just not filled out the form properly or don't have a permanent address, so it's hard to get in touch with them. So that's the solution that we are seeking, is to make sure that we get at least the card in hand so they can go to a provider and get their meds filled, and get services. And but I brought that bill specifically as a way to address recidivism in our criminal justice system. And so all of the things we do here, seems like some of them obviously clearly seem like they're connected to each other, but a lot of them seem like they are unconnected and have no relationship to one thing. But really, in the instance of access to mental health care providers, paying for mental health care access.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. That is it can very clearly be drawn a connection between that and criminal justice reform issues. Because if we get people access to health care, they take advantage of those services, they're less likely to end up in jail the first time, second time, third time, reduce recidivism, increase stability in their lives, improve outcomes in general for their families, decrease number of crimes that are committed, and which decreases the number of people who are victims. We save money in terms of cost for incarceration. We save money in terms of cost of policing and prosecution. We improve people's lives, both as the victims and the ones who are committing the crimes. And so access to mental health care is an incredibly important part of how we address our prison overcrowding issue and how we address criminal justice in general in the state of Nebraska. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Decay would like to welcome 20 students and 4 sponsors from the 4th grade at Plainview Elementary School. They are seated in the north balcony. Please rise, students, and be welcomed by your legislature. Senator Hunt, you are recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. My school never got to come here when I was in 4th grade, and every time I see your shining young faces up in the balcony, I just feel so happy for you that you get to come to this beautiful building and see the work that we're doing and learn about the great history of our state through this building. It's really cool. I think this is one of the most beautiful buildings in the state, and I also think it's one of the most beautiful state capitals in the whole country. So thank you for being here. I hope that you all have fun at the Capitol today. Returning to the conversation I have been having this morning, what I want to impress upon all of you, and the reason that this being the first bill to target LGBTQ, transgender, expansive people, to make it this far in the Nebraska Legislature. The reason that's such a problem and why I don't think we should let this become a norm and let the culture of our state and of this body keep backsliding farther toward the radical right is because even the effect of introducing these bills has a negative impact on gender expansive and questioning youth, as well as the greater LGBTQ plus community in our entire state. This has a severe adverse effect on the mental health of trans people. In December, a new study showed that every time an anti-trans bill is passed, internet search results for the words depression and suicide go up. But when an anti-trans bill is defeated, the number of searches for those terms drops. The study also found that debating the bill has an impact on those search terms. So, it's not just the debating of these bills and the passage of these bills that has a negative effect on the trans community and LGBTQ community's well-being. It's what many trans people have reached out and told you, have certainly told me, that the constant barrage of these proposed bills is what makes them feel hopeless, because it reflects exactly what my son said to me, who said, no one in school is bullying me. None of my teachers are making my life hard. I'm a normal kid and I feel like a normal kid and no one says anything to me except my mom's colleagues, except lawmakers. No one at the grocery store, no one at the track meet, no one at Target, no one going around in our day-to-day life, no one in our neighborhood who lives on our block where my son walks our dog every day. None of those people are bullying him or making him feel any negative emotion. It's only lawmakers. I am upholding decency, and I'm insisting upon decency by refusing to reciprocate the empty civility that you have shown me. I am refusing to reciprocate the empty gestures of civility from my colleagues, because that is not the same thing as kindness and civility. It's not the same thing as collegiality. What gets me is the total asymmetry of stakes. There are numerous bills that would help many communities in our state from a financial perspective, from a rights perspective, from an educational perspective. There is a lot of good that we can do in our state with the bills that we have before us this session. But what gets me is the difference in stakes. I am fighting for all trans youth and all trans people's continued health care, which would be banned under this legislation, whereas the rest of you are upset due to being told the consequences of that in a forthright way. It's all performative, and I want you to show me that you have an interest in actual governance, even if it doesn't generate publicity and donations. Because you figured out that the culture war wedge issues are easy to leverage, they generate massive amounts of money, they secure your seat for re-election, but they have nothing to do with what Nebraskans are actually asking us to focus on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. After this bill, we have a tax package bill. And it is a large package. I don't even know when it was kicked out of committee, but I know it was in the last week. And we're going to be debating that today for 8 hours. And I think there's going to be a lot of conversation around economic development, stimulus, workforce shortages, recruit and retain. I see members of the chamber out in the behind the glass. And you can't recruit and retain people to a state that legislates hate. No one's going to move here, no matter how many taxes we cut, no matter how much money we put back into the pockets of the taxpayers, if we are taking away civil rights, if we are taking away human rights. The chambers know that, but they're too terrified of people in this body and more terrified of people on social media that to show up, stand up, do the right thing. They're more concerned about people in this body giving retribution to the things that they care about than they care about doing what's right and standing up for what's right. It's unfortunate because they're going to work themselves out of a job if they don't advocate against legislating hate, legislating human rights violations, legislating civil rights violations. If they would care just a little bit more about the people that they need for the workforce, for the jobs that they're trying to create here in Nebraska, for the businesses that they're trying to get here and the people that they're going to need to get here, if they would care just a little bit more, maybe you all would care a little bit more too. So I look forward to that conversation. I've heard it many times over and over again about how we have to cut taxes because it's going to destroy the state if we don't. People are going to leave in droves if we don't cut taxes. You want me to believe that when people live here, work here, have families here with the current tax structure, yet you won't believe myself and Senator Hunt when we say people will leave in droves if you come for their children. The workforce will leave if you come for their children. And then eventually when you come for the adults, they're not going to be here. So I look forward to being told how I should believe that these tax cuts are the answer to our workforce problem, when you won't believe that civil rights violations and human rights violations and parental rights violations are going to drive away a workforce that we already have and block another workforce from coming. My office received a message just a little bit ago from a healthcare provider saying that they have patients that are leaving the state already.
1 minute.
Patients already leaving the state because of this legislature, because of prohibitions proposed to healthcare access by this legislature. And we're going to see that more and more. I have medical professionals telling me that they're going to leave this state. People who are at the height of their profession, because we have world-class medicine in Nebraska, are going to leave the state because this body is insistent upon legislating hate and taking away health care from a specific targeted minority population. And somehow it does not sink into this body that you are committing a human rights violation by doing that. That is a step in the eradication of a population.
That's time, Senator. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, some items. Amendments to be printed. Senator Von Gillern to LB 807. Motion to be printed from Senator Hunt to LB 376. Additionally, new LR from Senator Dorn. That'll be laid over. Notice that the Appropriations Committee will hold an executive session today in room 1307 over the lunch hour. Appropriations exec session today in 1307 over the lunch hour. Finally, Mr. President, Senator Bostelman would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m. today.
Senators, you've heard the motion to adjourn, recess until 1:00. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, nay. We are recessed till 1:00.